Let's start with the before lecture chant. An unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. Good morning, everybody. Well, today we're returning to this chapter on engagement, the fifth edge state in the book we're studying by Roshi Joan Halifax, Standing at the Edge, Finding Freedom Where Fear and Courage Meet. And the book, as we remember, focuses on 5 human qualities that Roshi deems necessary in order for us to live a compassionate and courageous life. And the other 4 of the 5 are, that we've already discussed, are altruism, empathy, integrity, and respect. And as we now understand, they are called edge states because they all tend to have this shadow side to them, an edge over which we can fall if we lose our own grounding. So in terms of engagement, the other side might best be described as burnout. And I doubt any of us is unfamiliar with some aspect of burnout, whether it be centered physically or mentally or emotionally. And some of us have probably found ourselves in professions or perhaps living lifestyles that are well known to be highly likely to cause burnout, such as healthcare or social work or education, and certain high demand business environments, where perhaps burnout is actually just an occupational hazard. And in burnout, we might feel any range, obviously, of emotions, but we might be frustrated or cynical or feel powerless, or certainly highly fatigued. And we may have been overwhelmed also by the poisons, what we call the poisons of work stress, or maybe even an addiction to busyness. But wherever we may have found ourselves, and perhaps we still do today, we still can continue to cultivate and recognize the qualities of engagement at the high edge. Those being energy, bringing energy and involvement and efficacy to what we do, whatever we do. And this is a good place, I think, to share a Zen story, an ancestor story, actually, that was included in the chapter. And it's about a Zen master, Pai Cheng Huahai, who lived during the Tang Dynasty in China, so 700s to 800s. And he was well known as a model citizen in his community. He worked every day of his life. And one day, when he was well on in years, his monks, because he had a monastery, his monks decided he really needed some rest from work. So they hid all of his tools. And Pai Cheng was not amused by this at all. And he told them that without work, he simply had no virtue. Quoting him, "A day of not working is a day of no eating." He then began a hunger strike until the monks relented and provided him his tools. And as Roshi states, this particular story has been a guiding principle in the Zen tradition really for over 1,200 years. That is, it's a story of Zen work ethic, a story of an ethic of engagement, and a story of an ethic of being whatever will serve. And all 3 of these aspects necessarily include our wholeheartedness, our genuine connectedness to and love for what we do, whether it be a 9-to-5 job, volunteer service, caring for an elder or a child. And sometimes, as I'll explain in a minute, it is quite simply a matter of survival. You see, the work that the story of Pai Cheng refers to was actually a very important aspect of monastic life at his monastery, and not all that common at the time. And it included periods of work and farming. And these were traditionally not considered part of a monastic's life. But This allowed the monastery to become more self-sufficient and actually helped them to survive the anti-Buddhist persecution that was happening during Pai Chang's lifetime. Thus, a day without work is a day without food was a poignant reminder of their everyday reality. They might have starved otherwise. And maybe it serves as an important reminder to us too, of the breadth and the depth of the very idea of engagement, including being whatever will serve. And as usual, also in this chapter, Roshi offers some very effective ways to cultivate and support engagement in our lives. And last week we discussed work practice. Very important in Zen, this importance of practice and meditation inside the life we live. The reality that really there's no separation between our practice and our lives. Work practice can be seen as a compassionate offering to others, which we can give wholeheartedly. And even Dogen wrote about this as the continuous practice of the circle of the way. No gap, no separation. And another important way to support engagement is by practicing right or wise livelihood, the fifth factor of the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path. And we can see that it is directly related to what we're talking about, engagement and burnout. And of note is that the Buddha actually introduced right livelihood by enumerating what we should not do for work. And you might remember this when we were studying the Thich Nhat Hanh book. And this included, we should not deal in weapons or human beings or meat or intoxicants or poisons. But you also might remember from Thich Nhat Hanh's discussion of right livelihood that it looks at livelihood as an expression of our ideals, of love and compassion and our values. And wise or right livelihood would mean actually that we do not transgress from any of those. But we know this is not always possible for all of us. But in the context of our discussion of the edge state of engagement, what is important is not just what we do and why, but it must include a deep look at how we do it. So we can examine our own wholeheartedness and compassion we bring in offering our livelihood to others. But here Roshi reminds us that we could fall over the edge state of engagement also as a result of having fallen over in relation to other states. And this is easy to grasp. We may be offering, for instance, some work that helps alleviate suffering of others, but we may also find that our motivation starts to come from some sort of place of pathological altruism, for instance, perhaps a deep need for approval from others, or a compulsion to fix things. Or maybe it comes from empathic distress, in which we just identify too strongly with the suffering of another person. So we can see how these can lead us to burnout, the edge state of engagement. And in fact, all along, we've talked a little bit about how connected these five states really are to each other. Another idea that I think we will all appreciate is the value of what Roshi calls no work practice. And it's easy to put ourselves wholeheartedly into good work and service, to the point of giving it our all, literally, giving everything we have. And we, of course, risk running out of energy, of patience, of our ability to bring attention to the present moment. And this relates to the very wise advice that we can't take care of others unless we also take care of ourselves. So self-care is an important part of our practice, and it's the basis of our internal and external practice, and it's part of engagement. You know, for decades, when I was a professor at Fresno City College, and every semester I'd start the semester with great energy and gusto and excitement, especially after having a summer break. But the first weeks of a new semester for me were normally really exceptionally busy and tiring. I had a lot of other responsibilities besides teaching, and I worked long hours, happily, really, stretching myself beyond what my body and my mind could healthfully sustain for weeks on end. And invariably, after about 3 to 4 weeks of the semester, I'd get sick, and then I'd be home for some days. Normally, I'd get some sort of respiratory problem that my immune system just couldn't handle or keep up with me. And it happened every August. But it didn't happen at the beginning of the spring semester, in January. Because actually, when I was home recovering from this, and then in the months that followed, thanks to my body saying, all right, enough is enough, I could more clearly see how this had happened. And I could better create a plan of self-care. And this worked for me. When the beginning of the spring semester came in January, I never was run down or ill. But eventually, I also learned some strategies that mirror what Roshi advises in this book. She advises that we pause, maybe sometimes for quite a length of time. We might need that kind of break. And sometimes for what she calls micro pauses, just throughout our day where we take time to notice our breath. Just take a rest. And we take what we need and what we can afford in relation to how spent we are and how burned out we are. And when we slip over the edge of engagement, sometimes a complete break is what we need to regain balance in order to remain on the high edge of engagement. We've noticed and borne witness to each other here at being on the edge as we've interacted with each other here on Sundays. Some of us when providing end-of-life care for dear friends and loved ones, or in service to others. Some of us dealing with health issues that just turned our lives upside down. Some of us dealing with crushing overwork. Our practice can support us in these times in so many ways, as you know. But specifically related to burnout, we can consider a very fundamental notion of Buddhism and Zen. Serve without harming. And this, of course, includes ourselves. Sitting Zazen can arouse our natural tendencies towards inquiry and curiosity. And we can use these when we feel ourselves nearing the precipice. In one way, simply by asking ourselves questions. Why am I taking on more work that I need, or more work that I can handle? How can I be more resilient in this situation? Why am I still in this situation? We can bring our open, clear minds and hearts to listening to our own inquiries. And we can then perhaps, again, feel our feet still at the edge, but grounded. Tipsy, but not slipping over. We don't live in a culture that encourages slowing down and pausing. But if we can learn to recognize when we need to do it, then it can happen. Roshi talks a bit about being goalless and aimless, words that still carry, quite a bit of negative connotation in our culture, and especially in our work worlds. But what freedom there is in that. For most of my work life, I would have this running list of things to do at work, but also at home. And when I got home in the evening, and also on Saturday morning, I was committed, I was committed to completing as much as I could, one after the other. And we all know how that feels. It feels great to accomplish things and to strike them off of the list. But at some point, and probably age helped with this, I found myself more and more inclined to have a shorter list and to have more acceptance of that. Or maybe I have the same list for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and more acceptance of not having a list at all. More acceptance of taking time to stop and rest. And that's not to say, of course, that getting things done is not good. But rather we have ways to create space and time so that what is really needed and beneficial can be done. Taking time in nature, with friends and family, whatever it happens to be. And this is quite simply being more open to what is needed of me in the moment. And we know this idea in Zen. It's beautifully expressed in the well-known adage, know where to go, nothing to do. In other words, we can cultivate letting go of achieving anything, of grasping, of wanting. And what does that look like? Well, it could look like the refuge of your meditation cushion, or your garden, or the forest, or your grandchildren. And Roshi calls this time well given, not time well spent. Because if we look at time as something to spend, she notes, it very likely takes the very beauty and surprise out of it. So at the high edge of engagement, we sense the capability of immersing ourselves in the work that we want for ourselves and for the world. And we can nurture our capability of bringing ourselves to this wholeheartedness in how we serve, this being whatever will serve. Early in this chapter on engagement, Roshi references the well-known and loved Sufi poet Rumi, whom I know many of you know. So I'd like to end today by sharing with you the entire poem that she referred to. And let me read it for you first, and then we'll put it up on the screen for you. So this is Rumi, a 13th century Sufi poet. Today, like every other day, we wake up empty and frightened. Don't open the door to the study and begin reading. Take down a musical instrument. Let the beauty we love be what we do. There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground. Kate, will you put that up for us as a share? So I'll just read it one more time. Today, like every other day, we wake up empty and frightened. Don't open the door to the study and begin reading. Take down a musical instrument. Let the beauty we love be what we do. There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground. We'll take a few moments for reflection. Thank you, Kate.